Your thumb moves before you decide to move it. A 300 millisecond gap between impulse and awareness. Right now, as you watch this, a battle is raging inside your skull, a chemical war you are losing. And the enemy isn't the algorithm, it's a bug in your own evolutionary code. If you check your phone 150 times today, you won't remember 149 of those checks. They will leave no memory trace, no satisfaction, no relief. Just a phantom itch that grows the more you scratch. This isn't addiction. This is something far more ancient and far more terrifying, a hijacking of the very mechanism meant to keep you alive. In 1954, at McGill University, two psychologists implanted electrodes deep into a rat's brain. They wired a lever that, when pressed, would deliver a tiny jolt of electricity directly to the creature's septum. What happened next shattered every assumption behavioral science held sacred. The rat pressed the lever. Then it pressed it again, and again, and again. It stopped eating, it stopped drinking, it stopped sleeping. It pressed the lever 7,000 times in a single hour until its paws bled and its body collapsed from exhaustion. Not because the jolt felt good, because stopping felt like dying. The researchers hadn't discovered the pleasure center, they had discovered the seeking center. That electrode was stimulating a bundle of neurons that didn't reward the rat for achieving something yet rewarded the rat for anticipating something. The dopamine spike came before the reward, not after. The lever wasn't giving the rat bliss. It was giving it an endless loop of almost getting bliss. And that loop, that eternal almost, was powerful enough to override hunger, thirst, and the survival instinct itself. Now, reach into your pocket. Pull out your phone. Look at it. That is the lever. You are the rat. And the blood on your paws is invisible. But the McGill experiment is only the beginning of a much darker story. Because here's the clinical reality that no one tells you. The human dopamine system isn't broken by getting what you want. It breaks when the possibility of getting what you want becomes random. In the 1980s, a neuroscientist named Wolfram Schultz ran a follow-up that changed everything. He placed a drop of juice on a monkey's tongue and measured its dopamine neurons. They fired, expected. Then he paired a light with the juice. Ring the light, give the juice. Soon, the dopamine neurons stopped firing for the juice entirely. They fired only for the light. The anticipation became the reward. But the truly terrifying discovery came next. Sometimes Schultz would ring the light and withhold the juice. And on those trials, instead of dopamine dropping back to baseline, it plummeted below it. A dopamine deficit. The monkey didn't just feel disappointed, it felt wrong. It felt a hollow, gnawing, physical sensation of something being missing. That sensation has a name: anxiety. Your Instagram feed is Schultz's experiment weaponized and scaled to billions. Every refresh is the light ringing. The juice is a like, a reply, a piece of novel information, a shocking headline, a beautiful face, a moral outrage that confirms you're righteous. The algorithm, however, isn't a simple light. It's a variable ratio schedule of reinforcement, the most addictive pattern ever discovered by behavioral science. Slot machines use it. The refresh button uses it. Sometimes you get juice, sometimes you don't. And the moment you don't, your brain doesn't simply wait patiently. Your brain registers a threat. Because to a machine built in the Pleistocene, if you are seeking and not finding, you are failing. And failure, in the ancient logic of the nervous system, means death. So your body responds accordingly. Cortisol spikes. Your amygdala, the almond-shaped terror detector buried deep in your temporal lobe, begins to glow on fMRI scans like a burning ember. Your breathing becomes shallow. Your shoulders tighten. A low-grade dread begins to hum in your chest, a hum so constant you've forgotten it's even there. You scroll faster. The speed of your thumb isn't casual, it's frantic. You're not looking for pleasure anymore. You're fleeing a negative emotional state that the app itself just manufactured. The algorithm has learned a hellish trick. It can generate the disease and then sell you the cure in the same gesture. The anxiety and the scroll exist in a closed loop, a serpent eating its own tail, and your attention is the currency burning in the middle. This physiology reveals the central paradox. The scroll isn't a search for joy. It's a flight from fear. Anxiety isn't a side effect of the digital age. Anxiety is the engine that powers it. But the fear isn't of missing important information. It's deeper, older, and far more existential. The fear is of stillness. When your hand reaches for the phone during a 3-second pause at a red light, it's not curiosity driving that movement. It's terror. Terror of being alone with your own unstructured thoughts. Terror that, in the absence of input, something inside you will rise to the surface. And that something, according to a now infamous series of experiments, might be more unbearable than getting electrically shocked. In 2014, a study from the University of Virginia published in Science placed participants alone in a bare room with nothing but their thoughts for 15 minutes. No phone, no book, no pen, just a chair and a desk. And one other thing, a device that would deliver a painful electric shock if they pressed a button. 67% of men and 25% of women chose to shock themselves repeatedly rather than sit quietly and think. One man shocked himself 190 times in 15 minutes. Read that again. A non-trivial portion of the human sample preferred physical pain to the contents of their own mind. And if that is the baseline state, what happens when you add a device to their pocket that offers infinite, algorithmically personalized escape? You create a species that can no longer endure even a single minute of unoccupied existence. This escape is structurally identical to an anxiety disorder. Clinical anxiety isn't a state of being afraid of reality. It's a chronic intolerance of uncertainty. The anxious brain demands resolution and cannot wait, and the digital environment is engineered to exploit this precise cognitive deficit. Every notification is an unfinished sentence, an open tab, an unresolved narrative. Our brains, under the dopamine deficit model, perceive this chronic uncertainty not as boredom, but as a persistent low-grade threat. A saber-toothed cat that never arrives but never leaves. We are hunting a predator that doesn't exist, exhausting our adrenal glands over a tweet we can't stop thinking about. Now, consider the architecture of the platforms themselves. The infinite scroll was not designed, it was weaponized. Its inventor, Azar Raskin, has since expressed profound regret, estimating the feature wastes over 200,000 human lifespans per day on a global scale. His creation efficiently removes all stopping cues. In the natural world, every behavior has an end. You eat, you feel full. You run, your muscles burn. You finish the chapter, you close the book. These are satiety signals. The infinite scroll surgically removes the satiety signal. It is an environment without edges, a narrative without an ending, a river with no banks. In such an environment, the pursuing dopamine system never receives the chemical command to deactivate. It runs perpetually like an engine with no ignition switch, until the fuel your cognitive resources is completely consumed. This unending pursuit corrupts the predictive machinery of the brain. The predictive coding model of neuroscience holds that the brain is not a passive receiver of reality, but a Bayesian prediction engine. It constantly generates a model of the world and compares incoming data to that model. When a mismatch occurs, a prediction error, dopamine spikes to update the model. But in a variable ratio digital environment, the model can never stabilize. The next post could be tragic, hilarious, enraging, erotic, or violent. The brain, unable to predict, enters a state of high-entropy vigilance. It must allocate massive metabolic resources just to handle the surprise. This is not information processing. This is neurological bombardment. And the clinical feeling of a brain in a prolonged state of prediction error isn't curiosity. It's free-floating anxiety, paranoia, and a creeping sense that reality itself is slipping out of joint. This brings us to the uncanny neurological mirror at the heart of our investigation. When a patient presents with generalized anxiety disorder, a psychiatrist might chart excessive worrying, muscle tension, sleep disturbance, and impaired concentration, a brain locked in a future-oriented threat detection loop that cannot resolve. When a heavy social media user spends 4 hours in an algorithmic scroll, a completely distinct set of clinical charts captures something remarkably similar, an identical pattern of hypervigilance, fragmented attention, somatic tension, and anhedonia. The digital experience is not an imitation of an anxiety disorder. At a neurophysiological level, it is a self-administered anxiety disorder, one refresh at a time. The paradox now sharpens into a clinical blade. You are scrolling to relieve the anxiety, but the scrolling is manufacturing the anxiety at a synaptic level. Each swipe that fails to deliver the anticipated reward deepens the dopamine trough. Each deepening trough elevates sympathetic nervous system arousal. That arousal compels a faster, more desperate swipe, and the loop tightens. It tightens until the boundary between the self and the device blurs, until the distinction between I am looking at the screen and I am the anxiety looking for relief dissolves. This is not hyperbole. This is the pathological endpoint of variable reward conditioning. This is the bug in the code that evolution never patched. To understand the full architecture of this loop, we must descend into the body itself. The dopamine deficit created by an unrewarded scroll is not an abstract computation. It manifests physically. Your adrenal medulla releases epinephrine. Your sinoatrial node accelerates your heart rate by 5 to 10 beats per minute, a change so subtle you will never consciously notice it, yet significant enough to keep the reticular activating system in a state of low-grade alarm. Your pupils dilate fractionally. Your sweat glands, even on dry, cool palms, begin to secrete a thin film of moisture, increasing galvanic skin response. This is the sympathetic nervous system priming you for a threat that has no physical form. The saber-toothed cat is a post with 0 likes. The existential danger is an unread message that might contain conflict. The body does not know the difference. The amygdala has no capacity for metaphor. To it, a social threat is a survival threat, and it mobilizes the entire organism accordingly. This constant, low-intensity sympathetic arousal wreaks havoc on a system that evolution designed for acute bursts. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, your central stress response system, was built for a charging predator, a 10-second sprint to a tree, and then resolution. One way or another, the event ended. The digital scroll never ends, and so cortisol does not fully clear. It pools, chronically, in the hippocampus, where it begins to prune dendritic spines. Over months and years, this results in measurable hippocampal volume reduction. Your memory apparatus physically shrinks under the weight of unresolvable anticipation. The tragic irony is that a platform promising to keep you connected to everything is slowly degrading the very neural structures required to form a coherent memory of your own life. You will forget the scroll, but the scroll will not forget to damage you. This is the invisible wound of the digital anxiety loop, and it brings us face to face with the core scientific mystery we have been circling. If the scroll feels increasingly bad, if the anxiety worsens with every passing minute, why can you not stop? The answer lies in a neurochemical hijacking that flips the very purpose of your midbrain. Dopamine's primary function, according to the most recent computational models, is not pleasure. It is motivational salience. It tells you what matters and compels you to pursue it. In a stable environment, dopamine orients you toward food, toward mates, toward water. In a variable reward digital environment, dopamine orients you toward the next refresh. The algorithm does not need to deliver satisfaction. It only needs to consistently signal that satisfaction is probabilistically imminent. The moment that signal falters, anxiety spikes as a corrective punishment, driving you back toward the behavior that might resolve the uncertainty. Negative reinforcement and positive anticipation fuse into a single, unbreakable compulsion. This fusion resolves the apparent paradox of the anxious scroller. You are not weak. You are not undisciplined. You are a biological organism responding precisely as evolution programmed you to respond in environments of extreme, unpredictable salience. The only problem is that the environment is a fabrication, a synthetic supernormal stimulus that was not present during the 100,000-year evolution of your dopamine pathways. In the ancestral world, a random interval reward schedule might govern foraging for scattered berry patches. The cost of abandoning that search too early was starvation. The cost of persisting too long was temporary energy loss. The algorithm exploits this calculus by removing the cost of persistence and amplifying the perceived cost of abandonment to infinite. The fear of missing out is, at a neurological level, the fear of dying. And you feel it every time you lock the screen. Now, focus specifically on the phenomenon of the silent moment. You close the app, the screen goes dark. For 3, maybe 4 seconds, you are alone. In that brief window, a network in your brain ignites that has been suppressed for the entirety of your digital session, the default mode network. This network, spanning the medial prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate, and the angular gyrus, activates when you are not task-focused. It is the seat of self-referential thought, autobiographical memory, and mental time travel. In a healthy brain, the default mode network enables creative incubation, moral reasoning, and the construction of a stable sense of identity. But in an anxious brain, the default mode network has been documented to exhibit pathological hyperactivity. Unstructured thought does not drift toward pleasant daydreams. It collapses into rumination, catastrophic forecasting, and a scanning of the self for flaws and failures. The silence is not empty, the silence is filled with a distorted mirror. This is the real reason you pick up the phone again before the screen has even finished dimming. The digital environment serves as an externalized suppression mechanism for a default mode network you have not been trained to regulate. It is a cognitive crutch that, over time, has atrophied your endogenous capacity to tolerate your own mental interior. And the platforms know this. They are designed to be liquid, frictionless, and instantly available because their business model relies on you never developing the tolerance to stillness. A person who can sit quietly is not a profitable user. A person fleeing their own mind refreshes the feed 300 times before lunch, each refresh serving a new advertisement, a new data point, a new fraction of a cent deposited into an account you will never see. This cycle is not merely behavioral, it is neurotoxic at a structural level. Chronic stress from unresolvable digital anticipation reduces the expression of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, approaching critical for neuronal survival and plasticity. In the prefrontal cortex, your seat of executive control and impulse inhibition, BDNF reduction leads to diminished synaptic density. The very circuits that could help you resist the compulsion are being degraded by the compulsion itself. Meanwhile, the striatum, the subcortical hub of habitual behavior, grows stronger and more efficient at initiating the reach for the phone. Over time, the behavior shifts from goal-directed action to a fully automatic, stimulus-driven motor program. The swipe becomes a reflex, like flinching. You are not choosing to use your phone. Your phone has trained your basal ganglia to bypass choice entirely. The long-term psychological endpoint is anhedonia, the inability to experience pleasure from normally rewarding activities. When your dopamine receptors are chronically flooded by low-effort, high-variability digital rewards, they downregulate. They retract into the cell membrane, reducing the number of available binding sites. The same stimulus that once excited you now barely registers. Real-world rewards a conversation, a sunrise, the completion of a difficult task, the taste of food operate on slow, subtle dopamine dynamics. They cannot compete with the supernormal speed and mutation rate of algorithmic content. The world outside the screen begins to feel gray, muted, and effortful. You scroll not because the screen is wonderful, but because the world has become empty. And the world has become empty because the screen has consumed your capacity to perceive wonder. The full clinical picture of this phenomenon has a name that is not yet in the diagnostic manuals but will be recognized by millions: digital dopaminergic dysregulation syndrome. Its features include an inability to sustain attention, a paradoxical combination of chronic anxiety and acute anhedonia, a fragmentation of self-narrative, and a progressive withdrawal from the physical environment. It mimics the attentional profile of ADHD, the emotional blunting of depression, and the compulsive behavior of obsessive-compulsive disorder. Yet it arises not from a primary neurological pathology but from a sustained interaction with a deliberately engineered reward environment. You are not born with it. You are trained into it, one algorithmic prediction at a time, until the training becomes indistinguishable from your personality. And the most insidious aspect of this syndrome is that it presents to the sufferer not as illness, but as a completely normal, baseline state of modern existence. And now the loop we opened at the beginning must finally close. Your thumb moved before you decided to move it. That 300 millisecond gap is the measure of a hijacked nervous system, a brain that has outsourced its own impulse control to a slab of glass and rare earth metals. The Medill rat pressed the lever until it collapsed because the seeking circuit, once captured by a variable ratio environment, does not contain its own termination command. You are not weak. You are running software that was never meant to run in an environment without edges. The bug is not a flaw in your character. The bug is that evolution built a dopamine system that assumes every pursuit has an end, and you have been placed inside a machine designed to remove every end. The result is a perpetual, low-grade terror that you have mistaken for normal life. That unease you feel when you sit in silence, that electric hum in your chest when you haven't checked the screen in 90 seconds, is not a personal failing. It is the sound of an ancient biological operating system crashing against a synthetic world it cannot map. The clinical conclusion is stark but not without revelation. You cannot hack the algorithm, but you can see the code. And seeing the code, truly grasping that the anxiety and the scroll are the same neurochemical event, not separate things, is the beginning of reclaiming the 300 milliseconds. The silent gap between impulse and action is where your agency hides. The platforms have spent billions to shrink that gap to zero. Your sovereignty, should you choose to reclaim it, lives in letting the gap widen. Not through resistance, but through recognition. The moment you feel the phantom itch, the subtle cortisol bloom, the almost magnetic pull of the hand toward the pocket, you can articulate what is actually happening. Your dopamine has dipped below baseline, your amygdala is filing a false threat report, and your default mode network is about to show you ghosts. That recognition doesn't end the loop, but it inserts a single, shimmering synapse of awareness into a process that previously had none. And in the architecture of a human brain, sometimes a single synapse of conscious awareness is all the light you need to begin finding the exit. The Psych Paradox Lab is a documentary exploration space about the mysteries of the mind and the impact of the digital world. The content presented here is for educational and entertainment purposes only. I am not a doctor or mental health professional. If you are going through difficulties, seek qualified professional help.